Welcome to Rainier Avenue Radio, and this is a continuation of our series of shows where we take a look at the impact of the coronavirus on South Seattle and surrounding communities. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us again here today. We know now that not only do we have folks who are from our communities who join us, we also have folks from other areas, and we try and also let you know what's going on in surrounding communities. So again, thanks to our local audience listening, who we super serve, South Seattle, all of our surrounding communities. And then again, now we are aware of the fact that we have more folks listening regionally, more folks listening nationally, and more folks listening internationally. At one point, Seattle was called the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. In South Seattle, we have a very diverse community. And so right away, Rainier Avenue Radio, we switched what we were doing into serving the needs of our community, which at that time was to begin addressing things that we knew were impacting our community because we heard so from our community members, and bring those to light. We talked to folks from service providing organizations, from educational institutes, found out a number of different things, talked to small businesses, small business owners, the business associations. We began to bring on politicians, and again, just addressing a number of the issues that impacting our community made us and other communities aware that we are all essentially in this boat together, but there may be some differences and things that we can learn from each other. A little later in the show, we'll be talking to the mayor of Yakima, and then also a couple of members from the community of Spokane to find out what's going on in eastern Washington, the impact that the coronavirus is having over there. Right now, we'll be talking to leaders of the Asian community so that we can share information about what's going on in the community. They can share information about what's going on in the Asian community. Recently, the FBI warned that hate crimes against Asian Americans were likely to increase as the coronavirus pandemic continues. And essentially, since the COVID-19 outbreak, people of Asian descent have been spit on, yelled at, and attacked throughout the United States. And the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention recognize that the novel coronavirus probably originated in Wuhan, China. Asian Americans are not responsible for this disease's emergence or spread. This type of generalization that associates an individual with perceived wrongs in an entire ethnic or racial group is almost a textbook definition of prejudice. My guests joining me today are going to be Toshiko Hasegawa, Executive Director for the Washington State Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs. Toshiko, are you on the line?
I'm right here, Tony. It's so great to join you once again.
Okay. And then also, and I make sure is it Ye-Ting from the United States Attorney of the Western District of Washington? Ye-Ting?
Yes, this is Ye-Ting Wu. Nice to be here as a guest with you, Tony.
Thank you. And then Herman Tam from the Director of Philanthropy for Keen. Herman, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks for having me, Tony.
And Valerie Tran, Operations Director for Friends of Little Saigon. Valerie, are you there?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Thanks for having us.
See, we're just testing this technology. It's working, but you know how technology is. You got to make sure. And Lydia, and again, help me. Faitalia, am I saying that?
Yes, Faitalia. Thank you, Tony, for holding this platform for our communities.
Okay, and I don't know if we can get a little bit more of Lydia. Lydia, will you say your last name one more again for me, please?
Sure, it's Faitalia.
Faitalia, Commission and Program Manager, United Indians of All Tribes. So we're going to talk about some issues that obviously impact discrimination and hate and bias, but then also just from a number of different angles. I know that Seattle's Chinatown has been organizing a fund to provide financial assistance to local businesses, the Chinatown International District restaurants and other small businesses. Relief fund. It will allocate grants to the district, which houses over 400 businesses. And information that I have that says that restaurant business, in particular in Asian communities, has fallen off in some areas as much as 80%. Having said that, we're going to begin this discussion. So what I would like to do because there's going to be so much to talk about and not a lot of time. I'm going to go back to everybody, and then just take about a minute, and please tell us who you are and what you do. We'll get into some of the other stuff right after that. But I just want to give everybody an opportunity here to give an explanation about, what you do for all our listeners who may be unfamiliar with you, and in particular for those who are listening in Asian communities who are looking for someone to talk to, who are looking for a place to turn, who are looking for help and information. That this continues to be a forum for that to happen. So, Toshiko, welcome to the show, and just please tell us a little about yourself and the Washington State Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs.
Sure. Well, first things first, I'm a proud Beacon Hill girl. I was born and raised in South Seattle. I'm a fourth generation Japanese American and a lifelong Washingtonian. And so, Rainier Avenue is my stomping grounds, and RainierAvenueRadio.World is my channel. So I'm really glad to join you with you here today. The Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs is a small agency at the state. And what we do is we advise the governor, the legislature, and all the other state agencies on the issues that impact Asian Pacific Americans. To give you a quick snapshot of our community, we have over 48 different recognized nationalities representing different countries around Asia and the Pacific that really do constitute our community. We speak over 100 different languages and over 1,000 different dialects. We are in every single county in Washington state, and we are the second largest and fastest growing minority population. So we're huge stakeholders. And we're all at different levels of our acclimation to our arrival to the United States. We all come from some generation of immigrant or refugee population. And so our role is to make sure that our issues, our voices are represented in the decision-making process at the state level. To help us do our work, we are a humble staff of 2 people who are supported by 12 incredible volunteer commissioners who are appointed by the governor. And our commissioners represent the geographic and some of the cultural diversity of the state as well. And when it comes to COVID-19 response, we really look at it in terms of buckets of work: economic development, civil rights and immigration. And civil rights really has been a bulk of that, the hate crimes work as well. Education, right? All of our students, the families, the teachers, all impacted. We look at the census and how that's going to impact our census, full count efforts statewide here at home. That is also still as important as it was before COVID hit. And of course, health and human services. What does access to those services look like, and what are the disparate outcomes impacting our communities when we're trying to make a meaningful response to COVID?
Awesome. Look forward to talking to you, and thank you, Toshiko. And also, again, joining us in the show, Ye-Ting Wu, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Washington. Welcome to Rainier Avenue Radio.
Good afternoon. I'll introduce myself again. My name is Ye-Ting Wu. I have been with the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Washington for over 25 years, and I'm a federal prosecutor in our criminal division. And I am the office's criminal civil rights coordinator, responsible for working closely with local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies on the investigation and prosecution of hate crimes and other criminal civil rights matters. So for those folks in the audience that are not familiar specifically with the U.S. Attorney's Office, we, of course, operate under the United States Department of Justice. We have a criminal and a civil division. On our civil side, we also have a civil rights coordinator. Her name is Christina Fogg. We do handle all matters of complaints concerning civil rights, and in particular, during this time of the pandemic, we are really focused on hate and bias-related incidents that are affecting our community, as well as any fraud complaints that are occurring as a result of the pandemic. And we really encourage you, folks out in the community to reach out to us. Specifically for myself, I too am a lifelong resident of Washington. My family immigrated here from mainland China and from Hong Kong. So, of course, this situation that is affecting the Asian community is really close to my heart, and I pay very close attention to all that's going on around us with respect to the hate and bias speech that's happening. And we remain very dedicated to vetting every single incident that is that we are made aware of. And that's what I'm hoping to contribute today during this broadcast, is to give people some assurance that their reports of what they're experiencing in terms of hate and bias related incidents are going to be taken seriously, and they're going to be investigated fully, and that we will consider reporters to be victims and witnesses and treat them with that kind of respect and dignity. We just really want to encourage folks to report to law enforcement, to report to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I can get into that a little bit later. But again, I really thank you for having us on the broadcast, and hope to share more.
Thank you, Ye-Ting. And Herman Tam, Director of Philanthropy at Keen On. And we had Lillian Young on a couple of weeks ago, sharing information with us about Keen On and about the elder Asian community and what's. So, Herman, glad to have you on the program. Herman Tam.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Herman Tam, and I am the Director of Philanthropy at Keen On, but I'm also on the leadership team, so I'm quite aware of kind of everything that's happening within the organization and some of the issues that we're dealing with. I'm also from, I'm born and raised here in Seattle as well, Beacon Hill kid, and so grew up in South Seattle, hung out a ton in the Rainier Valley. So I actually joined Keen On about a little over 3 years ago now. And yeah, we are located in South Seattle, actually just a couple blocks from the radio station there in Columbia City. And we are a long-term care facility that's a nonprofit as well, and we serve Asian seniors and their families in the Puget Sound area. We started in 1985 as a group of Chinese leaders in the community responding to an increasing need to care for its aging elders. And with ongoing community support, we continue to grow to provide more services in the last 35 years. Now we have a nursing home that has about 100 beds where we provide skilled nursing. We have a 26-unit assisted living and adult family home facility, and also community-based services such as in-home care, caregiver support, and wellness education and activities for families in King County, focus on Asians. We have about 90% of our residents on Medicaid, and many of them are foreign-born. We specialize in catering to the unique cultural and dietary needs of Asian elders. We share the culture, traditions, and languages that our elders find comfort in. So during this time, we've always been focused on just the physical and emotional as well of just the aging process for our seniors. But during this time, our staff is trying to go above and beyond. We try to check in with our seniors, and and that includes everything that goes along with it, including if they're experiencing hate and bias. And so we're asking our staff to really branch out and meet their needs. And oftentimes these are foreign-born or people who don't speak English very well. And we may be one of the few outlets out there. And so we want to be available for the community in that way.
All right. Thank you. And also joining us, Valerie Tran, Operations Director for Friends of Little Saigon. Valerie, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having us. My name is Valerie Tran. I'm the Operations Director for Friends of Little Saigon. I myself am a second-generation Vietnamese American person. I've been both working and volunteering in the International District over the past 5 years, and have been with Friends of Little Saigon a little over 2 years previously on the board and now as staff. So I'm excited to be here. And right now is for everyone such a critical time for us to be doing this work. So Friends of Little Saigon, we've been around since 2011, and our mission is to preserve and enhance Seattle's Little Saigon's cultural, economic, and historic vitality. And we do that in a few ways. We do a lot of cultural programming with the Vietnamese diaspora in the area. We provide small business technical assistance to anything from helping people understand how to develop business plans, how to make facade improvements, how to locate their business in Little Saigon. So just making sure people have information and the resources they need to make solid decisions about their business so that they can stay in place and thrive. And we have a very diverse and representative board. We have people representing the small businesses in the neighborhood, board members with backgrounds in social work, law, architecture, and city planning. And so we just have a lot of strong energy to make sure that Little Saigon is able to thrive and prosper into the future and make sure that we're preserved as a cultural hub for the Vietnamese American community. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And Lydia Faitalia, CAPAA Commissions and Program Manager, United Indians of All Tribes Foundation. Let me make sure, Lydia, that I'm saying that title. Is that two different titles that I'm hearing, Lydia?
Yes, it's okay. Maka. I do have two different titles. I wear several hats in our community.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, go ahead. Tell us, at which, that brings up a whole nother level of how this is impacting. But go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to do that.
I'll give you a quick synopsis. My name is Lydia Moira Faitalia. I am Pacific Islander, first generation here in the United States, born and raised in California, moved to Covington about 2.5 years ago. I am a proud commissioner of Washington State CAPAA. We sit on many boards, but we also we're helping our Asian communities, our API communities, responding to this hate and bias by some of our citizens and other politicians, by unifying a response to combat racial violence against this community and standing together. And so we're doing that at the community level, the state level, by serving our Asian communities by referring their complaints over to our state commissions, and also partnering with our local ethnic and communities of color to stand together. And that's a short synopsis of what we do here at United Indians and also at CAPAA Commissions.
All right. Thank you. So this is what we're going to do in the interest of time, because easily, as folks can see who've been listening, once again, this is Tony B, and this is RainierAvenueRadio.World, our information, education, and awareness campaign to inform folks about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, specifically in South Seattle, our community in South Seattle. I have no shame about that. I'm looking out for South Seattle. But again, it impacts everybody everywhere. And the other thing about this is, as we've continued to do this, is folks from other areas in particular during this time of isolation are looking for information. And so this first question that I asked is going to take us up to our break. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about some more specifics. But again, for folks who may not receive information, everybody doesn't get press releases. Everybody doesn't watch TV all day long. And in particular, again, if you live in rural areas, you may not know what's going on in your own community, let again in communities that surround you. And so from each of you, if you can take a couple minutes, and if it gets a little long, I might have to cut you short before we go to break. But this is the big question here. And there's two of them that I would like you to answer to kind of set the table for how we get started. How, and again, from your professional perspective, from your personal perspective, and what folks might see here is folks may agree, folks may disagree. There may be some similarities in what each of these folks say from their different perspectives, but that's why we're here. So this first question, which is a two-part, is how has the coronavirus pandemic, from your perspective, impacted Asian communities? And the second part of that question that I'd like you to address is how has Asian leadership addressed issues impacting Asian communities during the pandemic? And I'm just going to go right back down the line. It's the same question for everybody. Toshiko, would you, from your perspective, how has the coronavirus pandemic impacted Asian communities, and how has Asian leadership responded during this time?
Well, I will say that the impact upon Asian communities was tremendous, and it was early. So I think we're all collectively going through something, but we need to recall that before there were any gubernatorial orders, people were already not patronizing Asian businesses because of some stigma or erroneous association of Asian faces and Asian communities with either unsanitary conditions or a virus. They felt their economic impact plummet long before any sort of official closures. Anti-Asian sentiment is not new to us. We're no strangers to prejudice or slurs or hate crimes, but it is on an uptick. There's a heightened sense of fear. Of course, our normal family life is completely disrupted, as is many other people's, but so many of our community members are grappling with these at-home study materials that are not accessible idiomatically. They're not accessible technologically, because we know that rural communities, we know that communities without resources or access to internet, broadband, or like actual tablets, the actual machinery that you need to connect to internet is disproportionately represented by communities of color. So the issues that were always there are being exacerbated, and it's completely flipped over and disrupted, I think, normal life. On the other hand, I think it's also lit a fire under a lot of people's seats to listen close to the community who already knows the answers and how they need to be assisted. And indeed, we have seen a tremendous community-led response to the coronavirus pandemic. I could give you a couple of very brief examples. A Chinatown International District community call of leaders who know how to access resources and know what the problem is in people getting to them, and making sure that they're talking together and talking with some of those service providers at ESD, at LNI, at Commerce, to make sure that those needs are being addressed and being seen and being met, albeit very slowly. And another example, there's a community-led conference call that happens at least once a week of folks from all kinds of different organizations to specifically address the issue of rising hate crimes, and will not wait for a state task force on hate crimes to come up with a reporting mechanism for Washington State. Hell, they're going to do it themselves. They're ready to launch. And now the state is taking its cues from community on how we can better serve them. And I think that that's highly appropriate. That being said, we need to make sure that we're doing what we can to get some of these resources to the people who are going to get it in the hands of the ones who would benefit from it the most. And we still have some blind spots, because in official resources, oftentimes you have to have a certain documentation or certain status in order to even be a beneficiary. We got a lot of work to do.
All right, thank you. And again, you know the question, Ye-Ting, from your perspective, from your professional perspective, from your personal perspective, please share with us the impact that the coronavirus pandemic has had on the Asian community, and how, from your perspective, Asian leadership has responded during this time.
Thank you, Tony. So I certainly have been keeping a very close eye on the media and kind of having my ear to the ground, so to speak, in communicating with folks involved in law enforcement and government to understand and to be informed about what they're hearing in terms of how the Asian community has been experiencing hate and bias incidents. We're hearing a lot of secondary and anecdotal information about how people are being subjected to verbal violence and verbal harassment, and even physical violence and physical harassment. What there is a gap is that those incidents are not getting reported to law enforcement. And so that's the reason why I refer to them as secondary or anecdotal information. As you may have seen,
I'm just gonna ask you really quick, and I want you to continue. Why do you think they're not getting reported?
I think a lot of it has to do with a bit of misinformation about what law enforcement can do, particularly when it comes to verbal harassment. Okay, so we are well protected under the First Amendment. Freedom of speech, we hold that very dearly here in the United States. And so to some extent, people calling another person by a racial slur, that in and of itself is generally not actionable as a crime. And so there may be a tendency to believe, well, I've been called racial slurs in the past. There's nothing we can do about it. So why get law enforcement involved? But the messaging out by police now, especially by Chief Best, by the Bellevue Police Chief, Chief Milet, and as you will have seen in the media, the FBI is encouraging people to call in every instance, regardless of whether it appears on its face to be a crime or not, because there are many alternatives that we can engage in to reduce and to mitigate those incidents of verbal harassment and other acts that appear not to be criminal in nature. But I really like to tell people, don't worry about whether you think it's a crime. Let law enforcement and prosecutors determine whether there's a crime. There's also a lot of things that we're doing in outreaching among community partners to, again, reduce and mitigate those instances when people are being subjected to that type of harassment and discrimination. So we're really trying to encourage people, report, and we will be there to support you. And that's, I think, is the message that we want to get out to in terms of outreach and make people aware. We also want to encourage people to trust the process. I know that's not, I know sometimes that's a difficult thing for people to do, especially if they've not been involved in the legal system. But I can tell you, at least from my experience as a prosecutor, for over 25 years, I want people to trust this process. And we will do our very best to treat people who report and who are involved in trusting this process, to treat them with respect and with dignity.
Well, having said that, because
yes.
The other part of the question, do you think that Asian leadership has expressed that effectively to the community, so that the community feels as okay, wherever it's coming, whether it's trusted advocates or political or government, has leadership responded in a way to make sure that folks feel comfortable with that process?
From what I have heard and from what I have seen, I believe that Asian leadership is, in fact, messaging to trust the process. But they're not telling people only go to law enforcement. They're saying if you don't feel comfortable going to law enforcement, you can go to other resources. And I'll just point to, for example, I believe it was about a week ago, the Anti-Defamation League, the Seattle office, did an op-ed piece with Asian Counseling and Referral Service. And in that op-ed piece in Crosscut, they certainly encouraged people to make use of formal channels of reporting, but also encourage people to go to their community organizations and social services to get the support that they need to determine what avenue of reporting or what avenue of support is needed. So I think at this point, it's just that we need more messaging and more awareness and education. It's just as Toshiko had just talked about, in terms of getting leadership to work together and to coordinate and to get that consistent messaging out in as many languages and to as many communities as possible throughout the state. And I'm really thankful that the U.S. Attorney's Office is very involved with local, state, and federal government right now in coordinating that messaging that's going out. And I really appreciate that, especially in our work recently with CAPAA and the AG's office and the governor's office. And we're hoping to get that messaging out over and over again so that we can tamp down on this problem, but also be able to successfully investigate and identify those folks who are being violent in their attacks against Asian communities, as well as any other person who feels that they are being subjected to hate and bias incidents.
And we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to get our other three guests on as well. And like I said, I could spend, I'm sure, an hour talking with each of you. I'm glad that I have each of you on to get all of these different perspectives. So we're going to be back again and have our other three guests answer that very same question. And you're listening to RainierAvenueRadio.World, our special coronavirus impact of coronavirus on South Seattle edition that you can hear from 1 to 3 every Friday. We'll be back in about 2-3 minutes.
This is RainierAvenueRadio.World.
Hi, I'm Paul Pearson of StarTime. Did you know that back in the 1930s, Rainier Avenue Radio operated out of a supply closet in the Columbia City Sea First Bank? Well, times have changed and so have we. Now you can hear all the great Rainier Avenue Radio shows on our mobile app for Android and iPhone. It's completely free on the Google Play Store and the iPhone App Store. The Rainier Avenue Radio app.
Wash your hands, don't touch your face, wipe things down, clean up your space. When you cough and sneeze, do responsibly. If you feel you're getting ill, isolate at home and chill. No, you're not alone. Please pick up your phone and call 206-477-3977. King County 206-477-3977. Public Health 206-477-3977. King County 206-477-3977. Public Health Community Radio Station will provide you with more information. Say Rainier Avenue Radio. Your community radio station will provide you with more information. Rainier Avenue Radio.
This is a RainierAvenueRadio.World community update on free, unlimited family streaming services that you can access with your King County Library card. Enjoy quality educational content on Canopy.com like Sesame Street, Arthur, and language learning. Unlimited access will be available for the next 30 days at kcls.kanopy.com. That's kcls.canopy.com.
Check out Fresh Juice on Rainier Avenue Radio every Wednesday night, 9 to 11 p.m.
as we bring you the hottest new hip-hop, dope guests, and interviews with artists on the rise.
Plus, you know you can kick it with me, D-Money, and Evan B. Culture.
Every Wednesday night, 9 to 11 p.m. on RainierAvenueRadio.World. Fresh Juice.
You're listening to RainierAvenueRadio.World. Check us out on social media. Facebook and Instagram, RainierAvenueRadio.World, and on Twitter at RainierAvRadio.
All right, and I want to remind you that you can download the Rainier Avenue Radio app as well. It makes things really easy. You can get it on the Apple Store. You can go to Google Play. It's free, and then with just one click, you can either listen, or when we're visually broadcasting, you can watch as well. So that's the Rainier Avenue Radio app. You can go to the Google Play Store or Apple Store and just search Rainier Avenue Radio, and you can get the app. Right now, we are discussing the impact of the coronavirus on South Seattle and surrounding communities, and we are talking about the impact specifically on the Asian community right now. And Again, with the folks that I have with me, I could probably talk to each of them for an hour. So right now, I'm just asking a very big, broad question. We'll get a little bit more detailed a little bit later, but I wanted to make sure that everyone had the opportunity to thoroughly answer this question, at least for a couple of minutes, because it's so broad. And there are so many nuanced answers to this question about who it impacts and how it impacts them. And so my folks here today will tell you from their perspective professionally. And it's the same question, Mr. Herman Tam. You know the question now. How has the coronavirus pandemic impacted, from your perspective, our Asian communities, and how has Asian leadership responded during this time?
Yeah, I really resonated with what Toshiko said earlier, that racism, hate, and bias has not been a new thing for us in the Asian community. It's just that, it's not as out there, in terms of the news and everything.
Actually, according to statistics, had been declining for the last couple decades.
Yeah, possibly. I agree too, that sometimes, especially among foreign-born people who don't speak English as well, folks like my parents and some of my relatives, my older relatives who maybe don't speak English as well. There is a little bit of a fear of retaliation. There's also a language barrier. They just don't want to ruffle the feathers, even though, so it's kind of like they put their head down and they just kind of take it and then they move on, and so I think a lot of oftentimes things just don't get reported as well. But growing up in South Seattle, I myself I've experienced it, growing up all my life, even as early as just a year ago with an incident at Costco. Something happened to me where, things just don't always get reported. But, I think it definitely happens. And I think language can also be a barrier as well for these things getting reported. So, but definitely right now, it's tough. Like, I know even myself, just going out in public, whenever I need to go grocery store or just run over to a hardware store, if I suddenly, feel an urge to even just cough a little bit, clear my throat, I'm self-conscious about it. And I've heard many Asians say the exact same thing, and those are just kind of more subtle things that, it just begins to mess with your psyche a little bit. And so, and definitely, I think the Asian community is feeling the impact of the situation, and there's definitely been heightened. I've been following the media just as well, and you were definitely seeing an uptick in
and how do you feel that Asian leadership has responded to this again heightened hate and bias?
Yeah, it's tough. I think, just from a normal everyday citizen, not even working at Kenon, sometimes, I feel like I think what the Asian community, the leadership is doing is good, and we're trying to disseminate information and trying to have avenues for people to report and things. But oftentimes it's tough because even with law enforcement, they can only respond, and you can't stop an incident as it's happening. And I think just seeing the political environment and the inflammatory notes, even from our highest level leader, it just doesn't help the situation. And I think it's a tough call. But in terms of the Asian leaders who I work with right now in this immediate situation that we're in, I think what our leaders have been doing is just trying to meet practical needs of the people as they hear it. Some things as simple as providing runs to the grocery store, or dropping off to our seniors at their homes, or tapping into their networks to gather supplies to support healthcare workers. And and I think one of the greatest things that I've seen Asian leaders do is that despite their hatred and racism, there's been massive support for the first the healthcare workers and the people on the front lines. And so I think that that's been very encouraging to me, that Asian leaders are choosing to take the high road in a sense and to provide that kind of support.
Thank you. And Valerie, welcome back. You know the question. I'll repeat it if you need me to, but you can go ahead and again,
right.
both questions.
Yeah, so I think my colleagues here have all given a great overview, and what I can focus on is more about the impacts that the small business community in the International District has been facing. So in the past month, just the number of public health restrictions, city, state, and federal government policies and relief, like grants and loans, those are coming out like so quickly. It's been like drinking from a fire hose. And if you can imagine how difficult it is for us to already understand some of those texts in English, imagine what it's like trying to understand those if English is not your first language. So I think a lot of what we've been trying to do is make sure that as community-based leaders and organizations, we are closely connected with each other, and that we are simplifying, interpreting, and translating these documents consistently so that we are not contributing to sources of misinformation or adding additional confusion into the community. So that's been something I've been really proud to see, is how closely our organizations have been working together to make sure that the information we give out is accurate and is distributed in a timely manner. But the reality of things is when something comes out in English, it's pretty complex, and we feel about 4 to 7 days behind everything. Just trying to get this information out to people, striking a balance between getting it out very quickly or getting it out accurately. So that's always a thing we're working on. And I see Toshiko nodding right there.
It's just so frustrating because if people are not having access to apply to unemployment because this document isn't translated, well, we're just realizing that now. That means for in perpetuity over time up until this moment, that's always been a challenge. So it's really fleshing out some of like our historic systemic failures. And it's also the opportunity and finally having some momentum to maybe meaningfully address them.
Yeah, so it feels like we're consistently getting in, but are at the end of the line because we are acting as quickly as we can, but it's still a little bit too late. Another thing that we've been able to do is,
well, let me ask you. I just asked the question. So again, because in every community, this is part of what we're doing. Is there something that Asian leadership could do to ease what you've identified as a problem, or again, we know that in South Seattle this is a big deal. That's one of the things that's hard to do, is because there's so many different cultures and languages. It's difficult to communicate with everybody. Is that something that you feel Asian leadership has done effectively to bridge this gap of, again, when the information comes out and then the ability to communicate that information to folks in multiple languages?
Yeah, I think we've had to really revise our approach, because before, a lot of our relationships were in person and face to face. So a lot of our businesses recognized us when we went into the storefronts. But now that we're having to call people, it's a whole different ballgame where people don't trust who's on the other side of the phone, or don't know if it's a scam or if it's real. So we've had to take a few different routes. So we're doing a lot more through social media, through our website, through email. And we're hoping that a lot of our social media stuff is getting to the children of a lot of these business owners, because oftentimes their children are the proxies and can speak English and can say, hey, mom or dad, I saw this grant, you should apply to this, or I saw that SBA has this loan opportunity, I think we should apply. So we're doing a lot more to get out to folks intergenerationally, in the event that we can actually meet people in person at their restaurant or their business. And we've also seen the power of our organizations coming together, such that city and state agencies are now coming to us to ask us, how can we more effectively serve you? Can you give us advice on what your community needs so that this application that's coming out online is actually usable by your community, or this form that we put out isn't adding additional burden to you? So I think that's been the silver lining of all of this, is people are now looking to us for the answers, whereas before it was very reactive and asking us after the fact, how was this for you?
Thank you. And Lydia, Faitalia, same question. Lydia?
Yes, hi. So from my experience with working with some of our Asian community in South Seattle, is that a lot of businesses have been vandalized. The criminalization of some of our Asian elders is disheartening.
One second, Lydia. I just want to make sure of what you're saying and how you're saying it, because if this is a first-hand account, what I just heard you say, that in regards to South Seattle, and this is something you're feeling you can verify and validate, businesses have been Asian businesses have been vandalized.
Yes, there are some businesses. Let me go back. There are some Asian businesses that have been vandalized in Seattle, and there are some folks that have complained and voiced their concerns to. And let me just back up a little bit and just say that just talk about my positionality in this conversation as a Pacific Islander and as an ally to our Asian communities. That although I work closely with the Asian community in Seattle, and I sit on the commissions that oversee a lot of the issues with Toshiko. And I want to make sure that I clarify that there are cultural beliefs and practices in this community that they honor, right? And so when it comes to destroying of their property, or the rude or snide remarks at Costco or wherever it may be, sometimes it's in their culture to not respond with anger, right? And so you brought up a good point about data, right? Which we all know can be flawed depending on who's collecting this research and reporting it to the state, right? And that's the intersection we can go on forever about. But as a person who sits in these spaces that have access to certain political power or certain resources that can help our Asian communities, my role in both CAPAA and in United Indians is to bridge communities of color to stand up against, and my contribution to stand up against the racial violence and hostility, like I mentioned before, against anyone, regardless of race, color, or creed. I just wanted to tell you that. And a lot of our Asian businesses and a lot of our Asian communities are in fear of retaliation, right? And so a lot of times they'll go unreported. And so when the data reflects it, of course it's going to reflect like it's declining because of these cultural beliefs and also cultural practices. So we also have to take that lens into consideration. And so that's what I want to speak on, right? That's what I want to speak on, is now is the time for us to gather together and center the voices of the Asian community and get behind them and see how we can support. And that's what I have to say.
Okay. I appreciate your feedback. Again, I see us running close to low on time here. So what I want to make sure I give everybody the opportunity to do is have final words. And if you want to add a particular thing to the discussion that's already taking place, you can do that. And I think that what we have been able to do is hear from some folks and also find out, again, voices that are out there and leadership that is out there, and find out a little bit more what's been going on inside of the Asian community and what we see as opposed to what we necessarily hear from media. So at this point, because again, this issue is so big and there's a lot of things that can be touched on, I'm just going to leave it open for each of you for final words. If there's something that you've wanted to say and haven't been able to say, or there's a comment that you wanted to make. And I'm going to be a little bit more strict here on the time so that we can get everybody in before we have to go. So we're going to be looking at about 1 minute and 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And I'm just going to do this in the same order. Thank all of you for joining. And Toshiko, thank you again for your help in pulling this together. And your just overall general interest in your community. But we'll start with you, Toshiko, for final words.
It's funny when people try to tell me I have 1.5 minutes because I don't say less. I just speak faster, which is
I know, but I'm going to have to probably cut them off.
Well, it's just your last question I thought was interesting because you say Asian leadership. I think all of us could interpret that differently, whether we mean leadership coming from our community members, leadership coming from our community-based organizations, or elected leadership, or self-identified leadership, people who are running for office. Maybe it's leadership meaning people who are decision makers and they work at agencies, or they're the head of CAPAA, or they are CAPAA commissioners. Maybe they're people who are service providers, but leadership can come on every level. And I think what's important to remember is that Asians are actually underrepresented as compared to our general population in elected office. And a lot of these relief programs are being offered by either the city, the county, or the state. And representation truly does matter. They have an entire economy, an entire population to think of, but we only have one Asian city council member at the city of Seattle. We only have a handful of state representatives. We have 0 Asian representation on the King County Council. We only have a handful of Asian senators. And so really, when we talk about what more can Asian leadership do, I think it's also well pressed to ask the question, what do allies need to do in order to make sure that our community is adequately being heard and adequately being served? Because we're tremendous stakeholders in this, and we're innately tied together. So I really appreciate that question, and it's one that I'm really happy to have spent a full hour on.
Thank you. Ye-Ting Wu, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Washington. I want to certainly give you, and thank you for joining us and sharing your professional expertise as well as personal, but I want to give you the opportunity for final words here, whatever you want to say.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Tony. So I do want to just add, as a lawyer and as a prosecutor, and also, of course, in terms of my own personal connection to this, as an Asian woman with parents who immigrated to the United States, we recognize that there historically has been a tremendous amount of oppression against the Asian community in the United States, and particularly in the Pacific Northwest. So I think we are very, attentive to that history. And in many times that history has been forgotten. And now with the pandemic, I think it has come to the forefront again about the extent of oppression that the Asian community has experienced in the past and is experiencing now as a result of the pandemic and the hate and racial bias that has been experienced by our Asian sisters and brothers. And we want to be supportive of that. But I also want to put a plug in terms of the legal mechanisms that people can utilize to receive support and services through their government agencies, through law enforcement. And I know I probably sound a little bit like a broken record because I keep talking about that. But especially coming from the Department of Justice, there are federal laws that we can implement and enforce, not only on the civil side in terms of discrimination, but also on the criminal side. We have a whole toolbox of laws that we can look at. And if for some reason a federal law doesn't apply, we work really closely with the city and with the county prosecutor's office. We try our very best to do whatever we can to enforce the whole panoply of laws to be able to identify those offenders, to identify the people who are being criminally oppressive. And we just really want to be a resource and a support system for especially our Asian community at this time. And thank you very, very much for giving me a chance to speak and to be part of this very prestigious group of Asian leaders.
And we'll go to Herman just again a couple minutes. I'm continuing to hear a recurring theme, which is the focus on hate and discrimination, and I'm just hearing that from each of our guests. Mr. Herman Tam, final words.
Yeah, what my sister has already shared, I just really resonate with. What Toshiko was saying about being just self-electing yourself as a leader. I think oftentimes, it's really easy just kind of stand back and blame, quote unquote, the leaders in our community, but really, no great movement throughout history has ever been successful without just the everyday folks just going after things and looking out for each other and supporting each other. And so, I think my last word would just be just to the audience in general that, gosh, we just really have to look out for each other at this time. And I'm not just only speaking about the Asian community, but just whether you're Black or white or brown, Asian, doesn't matter. I think that as a community here in South Seattle, man, we just really need to look out for each other at this time. We don't need more just people just standing on the sidelines and letting things happen, letting comments go by. I think we just really need to speak up and not be a bystander, but be an advocate, be somebody to actually intercede and interject and call things out when things are wrong. And so I think that would be my final message to that I would want to convey.
Thank you. And Valerie, Tran, final words. Thank you for joining us, by the way, Valerie, and just a couple people said, the person you need to have on this show is Valerie Tran. So I'm glad that we got you on.
Thank you. So I'll put a plug in for all the Asian small businesses and more broadly POC businesses. A lot of these business owners are low income themselves. So even on our best days, we have cash on hand for just a few more days. So you can imagine that this pandemic has really devastated the community. So if possible, and if you can do it safely, please try to continue frequenting these businesses, call in your orders to go have a family member go pick up food for you, because these businesses need our support now more than ever. And they are a big part of why Puget Sound is a destination regionally for people to have these types of foods and goods and services. So we really need to support our small businesses and make sure that even after this pandemic has passed, that we continue doing that.
Thank you. And Lydia.
I just wanted to put in a plug for Support ID on Facebook, and many Asian businesses are on there to order and to get some follow-up. But I also want to speak to the public that is listening that it is our responsibility and our civic duty to report any hate or bias crimes against Asians and against any person. And I really encourage that, especially now. And thank you for this opportunity. Also, CAPAA has a website where you can report hate crimes, and we are in the process of working together, United Indians and several other organizations with King County and CAPAA, to create some sort of coalition and reporting. And I will send you some links, and Toshiko will send you some follow-up. And thank you for this opportunity.
All right. And I look forward to being connected to each of you. We'll do this again. Thank you each for joining me. I'm sorry if if you feel like I cut you short, but I think that there was just a lot of information that I wanted to make sure that we shared with this diverse panel all at the same time. Coming up in about 2 minutes, we'll be talking from leadership in Spokane and Yakima to talk about the impact of the coronavirus in Eastern Washington. So we'll be back with you in about 2-3 minutes. And again, thank you all on this panel for joining me right here on our coronavirus impact of South Seattle special.
Thank you.
What up, y'all? DJ Dirty Harry hanging out with my guys at RainierAvenueRadio.World. Check them out.
On RainierAvenueRadio.World, look for the Change Your Food, Change Your Life show. I'm Dennis Weaver, your good food guide and host, helping you to feel good and look good, and who wouldn't want some of that? All that and more from the Change Your Food, Change Your Life show on RainierAvenueRadio.World. Stories, songs, and guests. Begin living the organic good food life, and the rest of your life just may be the best of your life. Hose up, baby, to your help.
Don't spread COVID-19. If you're a young adult and you get the coronavirus, you might be okay. You may not even have symptoms. But if you give it to your grandmother, who gives it to your grandfather, before you know it, you can wipe out a whole generation. When it comes to the coronavirus, you have to think about who you might infect. So practice social distancing, avoid crowds, wash your hands, and if you have the option to stay home, just stay home. Do your part and help limit the spread of COVID-19. This message is a public service of RainierAvenueRadio.World.
This is Paul Schneiderman, the host of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio. Sports and Stuff is a sports show that focuses on the game day aspects of sports and also the business, policy, legal, and sociological aspects of sports. Tune into Sports and Stuff and listen to my interviews with athletes, authors, administrators, politicians, and others.
Lave as manos y desinfecta as cosas ao seu redor. O coronavírus é real. Seja inteligente quando se trata de lavar as mãos. É incrível saber que esse vírus pode viver em superfícies por até 9 dias. E por isso que é muito importante desinfectar as coisas que uma pessoa infectada pode tocar, como o seu celular, por exemplo. Mesmo que você lave as mãos com frequência, mas use o celular, os germes retornam às suas mãos imediatamente. Quando foi a última vez que você limpou seu celular? Quando o vírus é transmitido pela tosse ou espirro, pequenas gotículas viajam pelo ar e pousam em superfícies que você pode tocar com as mãos. No geral, tocamos nossos rostos 16 vezes a cada hora, e é por isso que é muito importante lavar as mãos e limpar as superfícies que costumamos usar, incluindo o celular. Esta mensagem é um serviço público da RainierAvenueRadio.World e Somali Youth and Family Club.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not explaining to my intern exactly what R&B is, I'm listening to RainierAvenueRadio.World.